for 6:47. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage when the race the backwards Lord. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible sun. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. He sounded forth the trumpet, and should never retreat. He is lifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, he smith my soul to answer him. Be true with my feet. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea. With the glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he dies to mend that holy love has lived to make men free. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Amen. Amen and amen.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for how you blessed us so far, Lord, through this study. I just pray that your presence will continue to be with us, that you'll that you rebuke all demonic spirits and press in your heavenly angels, Lord, that we would be blessed and not distracted, but that we can learn all the truth that you would have us to, Lord. I just pray that you will help us all to have ready minds. I know that we have been physically nourished, but as we continue to be spiritually nourished, I just pray that you would help us to have a clear mind to receive these truths, Lord, to be able to participate and allow you to use our minds to work together to really see what you would have us to see in these truths, Lord. I just pray that you would continue to be with us and that you would bless Sister Elaine as she leads out this study, that you will send your Holy Spirit to equip her mouth to speak the very words you would have her to say, and that you would please be with us all, that we will be able to comprehend and be blessed by this study. In Jesus' name, amen.
So, does anybody have any questions from the last study before we go to the next one? Any comments? I wanted to just, hopefully it's okay to say this, that Leonard better understands Sunday law. And I know that I struggled for a long time, and I know that others struggled for a long time. So does everybody understand how you can place Sunday law at 2014? Took me a long time to see the connections, and we're going to see them a little bit more as we go through this study. I don't know what that little thing was that just pulled up there. That disappeared, whatever it was. Okay, so This one is In God We Trust, and I think there's at least one more part to it that we'll be working on next week. So we've been looking at 2014 and overlaid it with the Millerite history. We saw that 2014 in the Millerite history is July 21. We read all the quotes and drew it out mathematically so we could see why the pioneers called it midway or midnight. It's midway between two dates, April 19th to October 22nd, 1844. The reason they call it midway is because it came between two dates. So they called it midnight as well, and we're going to see that because of the parable of the 10 virgins, but also then how do we get to Sunday law? We get that through Great Controversy chapter 38 and the structure that is in there. So it's midnight or midway because of the parable of the 10 virgins, from when the virgins go to sleep in the tarrying time, the bridegroom, to when they are awoken with midnight cry to a shut door, which is October 22nd. So we marked the tarrying time, we know, at April 19. We went through the quotes, Joseph Bates quotes, and we went through the Spirit of Prophecy quotes to where we mark it midway, midnight, and why we call it, and what makes it the tarrying time, what makes it the tarrying time. So we see a connection between with the 151, which is a symbol of the 2520, that connects us to the midpoint of the American Civil War with 2014. So just to get in place, 2014 as midway or midnight or Sunday law was part of where we needed to be in order to get to the study more so on midway as well and back us up to the Civil War. So we take that to our line in 2014 was midway or midnight symbolically between 9/11 and 2019. 9/11 is the tarrying of the bridegroom. 2014, the virgins are awoken. Then this one, and think about the mercy, because our little group here, we started in right at the end of 2013. God's mercy in calling us in here for such a time as this. So 2014, the virgins are awoken. Then the swelling of the midnight cry. Then 2019 is the shut door. We can place in here two dates, 2016 and 2018, that are in between, as you would experience in the Millerite history from July to August. Before we went to the Millerite history, we talked about the number 126 and 151, how they become symbols of the 2520. And just to back up where the 2016 and the 2018, you can mark those in there. We know those to be, because of the three camp meetings, you had Boston, Concord, and Exeter, and then the close of probation. So it was all a midnight cry, and it was a swelling into the loud cry. So we understand that the 2520 is the key that unlocks time. The first date that we want to look at will take us to 2014 is 1863, which is 150 years forward, takes us to 2014. What did we notice about 1863? We saw that the American Civil War was there, and it began in 1861 and it ended in 1865. We saw that 1863 is the midway of the American Civil War. We then take this history and overlay it with the history of 2001 to 2019. I guess you can't say that 2019 is history yet, but we laid it over with our line.
Well, a few days, like few months, or like
yeah,
months.
Yeah, it is almost. We're almost to the end of it. So, and we understand this is Civil War or Revolution. And this, so comparing it to the Civil War, the American Civil War, we see that 9/11 to 2019 is Civil War or Revolution. And we saw that also a Civil War or Revolution is the work in overturning a government to establish a new government or establish a dictatorship. So this is the prophetic repetition of the American Civil War. It begins in 2001, and we're going to mark how it changes in 2014, and it ends in 2019. So we're going to look at the history of what happened in America prior to 1863. Between 1861 and 1865, we saw the American Civil War. It was the northern states against the southern states. The northern states were led by Abraham Lincoln, or the Union, which were Republicans, The southern states or the Confederates were the Democrats. So we have the Union against the Confederates. Who's winning in 1861 prior to 1863? Who's winning the war?
Is it the Southern? No. Or were we the Civil War, right?
Yeah,
So
it's the Southern. Who's winning?
Southern says the South is winning.
Well, the
Yeah,
South.
the South.
That's what I
The
meant.
South. Yeah, Southern
Yeah.
South. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the South is winning. So we have the North, which is Abraham Lincoln, the Union, and we have the South, which is the Confederates. And prior to 1863, it's the South that is winning, and they're doing very well in the war. What did the Northern states do under Abraham Lincoln? 1863 marks the turning point. I'm thinking, because I get a couple of words confused because I was looking at Gilgal. Gilgal is a rolling of a stone, but that wasn't the one that stood for turning point, was it? Or was it the hinge, the turning point? Anybody remember? Well, anyway, so 1863 marks the turning point where you go from the southern states, the Democrats who are winning, and now the Republicans are winning. There's two important battles in 1863. The most important battle of the American Civil War was the Battle of Gettysburg. Robert E. Lee was invading the North, and he's halted at Gettysburg, and it marks the turning point where he starts to lose, and the Republicans begin to win. It's kind of interesting with knowing what they did and how they would not wind up interpreting it as such that God was with them. But anyway, so you have 1861 to 1865, you've got the turning point. You've got the North run by Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans, and the South, Robert E. Lee and the Democrats. So I just put in the Gettysburg Address just to mark a couple of points. And maybe we won't read it all. I just wanted to get down to the part where he mentions God. Maybe that's all one big long thing. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. It all sounds good, but he puts God in it, as this nation is under God. When the northern states are losing in this history, and why would it be bad to put this nation under God? Yeah.
Conscience.
Huh?
Force of conscience.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was this nation established on?
Constitution. Oh yeah, freedom of religion. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Constitution.
Republicanism and Protestantism, which Protestantism is the protest church and state formation.
Yeah. And so when you look at the Puritans when they first came in, and what they tried to establish that eventually culminated in the Constitution for that very reason, to not bring about a situation where you would have forced conscience and then religious persecution. So by making that statement, he's putting God into the as if God is over the nation. He opened up a place of freedom for us to come where we can all decide to choose for ourselves. So when the northern states are losing in this history, they start to think about why they're losing and what would help their cause. I hit record on there, didn't I? I think I did. Okay. There was, hang on one second, I gotta move something out of my way. There was a reverend, a pastor of a Baptist church in Pennsylvania. On November 13th of 1861, he sent a petition to the Treasury Department of the United States. This request or petition asked the Treasury Department to include some type of statement on their coins. He wanted the Treasury Department to reference God on their coins. In his words, to relieve us from the ignominy of heathenism, ignominy meaning shame, disgrace, or dishonor. So what this pastor is requesting of the government in November of 1861 is to save us from the shame of heathenism. We should have some statement recognizing God on our currency to do that. At least partly this had a political motivation. They wanted to declare early that God was on their side, the Union side. So this proposal is accepted, and beginning in 1861, they begin drawing up designs. They're trying to decide on a religious phrase to include on their coins. They want to recognize God on our currency. Congress had to pass legislation to allow this, but they begin to draw up the designs. And in 1863, they submit those designs. Abraham Lincoln's government decides on a new motto to engrave on the U.S. coins. This is making a statement in the middle of the Civil War that God is on their side. And the new phrase that they decided on was "In God We Trust." So they decide, and to think about that, if you're here to escape religious persecution, and now the nation is declaring that it is a Christian nation, or we're supposed to see these things, you know what I'm saying? I realize how merciful God is, first of all, because I was out in the world and I was clueless to anything. But to bring me into, not just to the Adventist church, but to bring me then into this movement and bring me to this point to hear the midnight cry, I am just ever so thankful and grateful for this blessed opportunity to be able to see what is actually happening. And it helped me to understand as well why the people in the world, you know, in the United States, you know, people outside this message, they have plenty of evidence to see if they would, without having to read their Bibles. So they decide in 1863 on a phrase, "In God We Trust," is going to be placed on the coins, and that begins to be engraved in 1865. What the northern states are doing, the Republicans, they're coming up with a way to show that God is with them, to use religion as a political tool in the middle of the Civil War. So the same graph, I think I had the same one in the previous one too. We use it through a good portion of this to go just add to it. So in 1861, they recognize that God is on the coin. They want to recognize God on the coins. 1863, they come up with the motto, "In God We Trust." They have to have Congress pass it in legislation to put it on there. And then in 1865, they begin to engrave the coins. And this marks a turning point because the North was losing in this portion here, the first half. And they mark a turning point, and it starts turning towards the north. So when you come to our line, we know that this is Midway, connected by the 151, a symbol of the 2520 at 2014. So we see Civil War in this period. We see Civil War in this period. We see the South or the Democrats winning, and we see a turning point begin to where now the North is going to be winning. So there's something else happening in this time period, and we're going to read a quote. It's a book on the world of Ellen White, and they're going through some history of the Civil War. It's early in 1863, and the Civil War has not been going well for the North. Distressed over the terrible disaster that the troops had suffered in December, the General Burnside, I guess that was his name. I'm just reading it. I didn't look him particularly up. Maybe somebody knows that. He steps down as commander of the army. The clergymen in the northern states interpreted that the Union's defeat is a manifestation of God's anger that was late in the year of 1862. These clergymen met on February 4th of 1863. They represented 11 different Protestant denominations, and they met in Ohio. They were discussing ways to appease an angry God. So again, the North is losing, the same history. The clergymen in the Republican states are saying that God is angry with us, and that's why we're losing the Civil War. They wanted to bring the nation back to God and say we've drifted away from him as a nation. We need to bring him back into our nation. These subjects were presented in the Brazil camp meeting, particularly the history of A.T. Jones. So for anybody that has, you can access the Brazil camp meetings when she goes through this more so. All of that history, it was discussed with A.T. Jones. He's standing in Congress. He's opposing bringing in Bibles to public schools. any recognition of religion by the government, and he stated to Congress that if they were trying to even recognize a Saturday Sabbath, he would fight them. What does that say about us waiting for a Sunday law and we're going to fight against fight against it? We're fighting for equality. We're fighting for our freedom and our right to choose, and not have any religious laws placed upon us. He said the United States has no religion, it's never had one, and never should have one. The fight by A.T. Jones occurred because of this meeting in Ohio in 1863, and due to the fact that they were losing the Civil War, they believe that God is angry. They need to appease him by bringing God back into their life and back into politics. They begin what is known as the National Reform Movement because of their losses in the Civil War. So the National Reform Movement, while you got two different things that were going on here, they come up with their motto, "In God We Trust," and you also have, from another angle, you have the National Reform Movement beginning.
Brother Jonathan puts General Burnside was the first president of the NRA, National Rifle Association. Apparently the inventor of sideburns. Inventor of sideburns.
Interesting.
At what point did Lincoln realize that the Vatican was supporting the South? Because I was wondering, he said he wants to make religion, and then all of a sudden he finds the Vatican. Doesn't he find out that they're supporting the South financially?
Maybe somebody has more answers on that, because I do know that Lincoln knew that the Catholic Church was involved in things, but he didn't seem to make the connection of uniting church and state doing what they did. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
Kind of wondering why.
Yeah.
Kind of a two-faced question, I guess.
Well, I know that those presentations were, it might have been in these ones, I can't remember, but where Sister Tess actually says that Lincoln was half right and half wrong. So the half right and half wrong does apply to some people, because he was wrong in his decision there with that. But I know, because he has quotes, that he says he knows what the Catholic Church was about.
And he couldn't go to war over that because he had generals that were Catholic.
And it's interesting, because we should know. We didn't know. We don't know. We don't know these things. If we remember the history. So he's back there in the time, should be remembering the history of the Catholic Church, should remember the persecution, right. Instead he's looking at it from a different angle, I guess is the way to say it. I don't know. And he, just the same as we would know. Go ahead, you can say something.
He's making the same mistake we did in 2014. He's looking at papacy when he should be looking at Protestants.
Yeah. So he didn't look at his own self and what he was doing. He was playing.
And he can be wrong then, because he was in the Alpha history. And where he'd be wrong is being against what is the right thing, right? Because he's supposed to represent a dictator on one model.
Yeah.
So, because she was trying to separate, in Germany, she tries to separate the two perspectives of Abraham Lincoln. And she says, these are two separate things. If we take the issue of slavery, he was right on slavery. But if we go to a separate one and look at church and state, he was wrong on that.
Yeah, Germany is where she said that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So according to, and then there's that other aspect, because I know that he was aware that the Catholic Church was involved in things. So so you'd think that he would know what we're trying to avoid here, the purpose of the foundation and the Constitution, what we're trying to avoid, and the very thing that we're trying to avoid is the very thing that they do. So according to the spokespeople for this association, the National Reform Movement, the reason that the Republicans were failing was that the government did not acknowledge the lordship of Jesus and was not enforcing his moral law. Even after the North won in 1865, they continued with their conviction that God was displeased or angry with America. They continued to warn for at least 3 decades that God was about to judge the United States because of their failure by the government to enforce morality. So that was, I'm looking at what it says about back then and now, but I'm thinking if that's their purpose, to want to bring God back in, what kind of example do we have for morality as our leadership, if that's what they're really trying to do? That's just what went through my mind when I read that. So They say 3 decades. That's from 1863 to 1873, 1883 to 1893. As we'll discuss, that covers the 3 Sunday laws that A.T. Jones marks in that time period. He says 1863, 1888, and 1893 up in here. These have to do with A.T. Jones and marking the 3 Sunday laws that we're working on. So it's a 30-year time period, and we'll discuss those dates later. In 1895, they published an article and discussed with satisfaction all that they have been able to do in that time period. So they're proud of their accomplishments and what they had done. So in light of Acts 27, we'll go through this history. What do we mark at 1863? The course in light of Acts 27, what do we mark? We mark that the course of the ship changes direction in 1863. At Netus, is that how you say the word? Netus? They begin to change course. So you have up here at 1863, we know the ship begins in 1798, and then they're traveling, and then in 1863, they go off course. In Netus, they change course. We discuss the ship. What does it represent? It represents 2 things. It's Adventism in the United States, and their path is intimately connected. When we come to 1863, what do we mark internally? There's organization in the church, which is a good thing, but prophetically, what they do is they reject the prophetic message. And we marked the scattering from 1863 to 1989. So when you get to 1863, this is where the 126 comes involved too. I don't have it on the line here because it's not part of the study, but 1989. So the scattering is 1863 to 1989. Internally, the ship goes off course in 1863. And does it come back on course before 1989 or even after 1989? It's off course all through that history. It just gets worse and worse and worse. So the United States went off course in 1863. Externally and internally, both go off course. One through the Civil War and wanting to put in God We Trust. And then the church rejecting the prophetic message. So if we consider the Republican horn and the union of church and state, this is where it goes wrong. Then we talk about the 4 generations of Adventism. It's a gradual destruction of our prophetic message. So you go from 1863 to 1989. This is the 4 insects of Joel, and the 4 abominations of Ezekiel, where we are taking on Catholic doctrines. We're going to say fighting in the doctrines of the Catholic Church. So we can see in the United States a gradual destruction. But we come to today, and Adventists think that they won't even consider the 2520, but now they think it's completely normal to reject the whole prophetic message, and many don't even accept the 2300 days anymore. But it's just become normal all the way back from 1863. And that's with anything that we have to give up, anything that the Lord brings to our attention, or anything that we have to change and what have you. The hardest part is our own mind, because it becomes something that's normal to us. It becomes normal, so we just see it for what it is instead of looking at what it was meant to be. If we trace our internal history, in that we need to be able to trace the United States in the same way. Should In God We Trust be on the American currency? No. But it's become normal, and now we think that it's fine to have this Christian element even on the currency. But it's marked in 1863 as a demonstration of church and state. In God We Trust should not be on American currency. So do we understand that here in 1863, we're seeing a union of church and state? Did everybody catch that? Follow that? That we see a union of church and state occurring in 1863. We bring all this history to 2014, and there's a civil war, internal, inside the United States, Republicans and Democrats. Who's winning prior to 2014? Everybody awake after lunch? I know the answer's there, but who's winning? Obama and the Democrats. Maybe you said that and I didn't hear you, sorry. So what did the Republicans begin to do? They want to bring together church and state, just like they did in the Civil War. They want to bring together church and state. As Steve Bannon would say, we need to defend the Judeo-Christian West. He sees the United States as a Christian nation, and he's working with major Republicans, becomes the chief strategist of Trump's campaign and all that history in 2012 in Cambridge Analytica. The tool, as it was pointed out earlier, it was a tool that was used by Steve Bannon and the Republican Party.
Can I
Yep.
read something, because
Yeah.
I am looking at this as we speak. I think it was before this. Where's this Burke guy? Okay. So I'm reading this article on Steve Bannon, and it is scary how this legit is Sunday law. This guy is crazy. His philosophy is based on this guy, Edmund Burke, an influential 18th century Irish political thinker whom Bannon occasionally references. I'm going to post this link in the chat in a minute. But here's what Burke believes. Let's see. Burke presents his view that the basis of successful society should not be what Bannon is saying is that the United States' strength is its capitalism, nationalism, and Judeo-Christian values. Those are his three tenets from this article. And capitalism and nationalism are very closely based with Judeo-Christian values. And in 2014, that really spiked his belief that we need that religious aspect for this to work. And this guy, Burke, that he bases a lot of his thinking off, says that the basis of a successful society should not be abstract notions like human rights, social justice, or equality. Rather, societies work best when traditions that have been shown to work are passed from generation to generation.
Oh, wow.
The baby boomers, Bannon says, is a lecture given to the Liberty Restoration Foundation, failed to live up to the Burkean responsibility by abandoning the tried and true values of their parents, nationalism, modesty, patriarchy, religion, in favor of new abstractions, pluralism, sexuality, egalitarianism, secularism. There it is.
There it is.
There it all is. So we don't need equality.
How'd you get to that link? How'd you get to that
you
guy,
should
Burke?
say that.
How'd you get to that guy, Burke? Have I not heard his name before?
It's in this article. I'm gonna post this article and I'm gonna save it. But
Yeah, put that on the.
Burke, something Burke.
Edmund Burke, an 18th century philosopher or something, political thinker that Bannon references a lot, his ideals.
So they want the religious aspect only for prosperity, if I understand
Yeah.
correctly. So that's why they want the religious, that's why they clamor for a Sunday law to restore prosperity to the nation. We're gonna see that as we go forward in this, when you go back to the 1850s,
Yeah.
1950s.
Because he says that the religious aspect, the conservative religious and capitalism and nationalism is what successfully brought the United States out of the war, and it's what brought Europe out of their mess. These are the values that keep prosperity in the country. This is what we need to jump back to. And he says he blames the baby boomers in the 60s and 70s for bringing all these crazy ideas like equality and race
Human
and
rights
gender
and
and
all
all
that.
those horrible things that we should believe in. That's who he is. Yeah.
I really think that's so. Yeah, I think that's so.
Pluralism is good. Bannon thinks it's bad. He thinks that pluralism is bad. Let me just put this
Wow.
in there.
You have to email me that, okay?
Yeah, I will do that. And I will save it for myself as well. But
Okay.
I already did that, but that's not.
Not this job, the one on the Sacramento.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay. So we're not just marking Steve Bannon. There's other people in the Republican Party saying that we've taken this nation away from God. We need to, and what's interesting is they're saying we've taken this nation away from God, but they don't want God. They only want him there for prosperity, right?
Yeah, like bless us.
Because
They want the
he's the one-
blessings.
Without, yeah.
Yeah, they honor their creations and not the creator.
Isn't that the way the sports people work? The football players and that, they want God on
So
their
they can
side.
win.
Yeah,
So they can win. So when the Great Controversy talks about when they clamor for a Sunday law to restore prosperity, I know that quite some time ago, I would have looked at that particular quote and looked at it as we're waiting for this great big,
Yeah.
this great big collapse, a Great Depression coming, and then they're going to clamor for it. But I believe it all happened in 2008, and that's what they're all doing.
Yeah.
We're already living in them doing this. It's kind of like the movie, back to the movie. The movie's continues to play. It's over a period of time that it plays. It's not just some point that it comes and it happens. It's been happening.
Yeah.
Let's see. We saw this push from 1861 to 1865.
Wow. It is playing and people are just arriving on the scene.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're just hopping
Yeah.
on as
We've been waiting for it to come, and we've been living in it.
Yeah, but it's interesting how, because it's been for us, since
Yes.
the beginning, and people are just popping on, as the movie plays.
Well, it's kind of like in Christ's time. They're waiting for the Messiah to come, and there it is.
And there he is.
Yeah. It's like we're in a world fair and there's all these tents and it takes forever to get through the crowd to get to the right tent. They're talking
It
about.
also, what came into my mind, and I've shared this with some people before, but it's been a while since I talked about it. Back in 2008, I wasn't in this message by no means. I was a Seventh-day Adventist though, and I was listening to things like David Gates, right? And David Gates did that presentation that was, maybe some of you are familiar with this, did that presentation that was early in September that year. And I had been for about 6 months. I've said to people before, I've never suffered, but I've always had to struggle and work hard. I'm not one that knows how to make capital and have, whatever passive income or any of that kind of stuff. Is I make $1 and I pay a bill, and that's all I know how to do. So I have nothing put away, but I did happen to have a period of time, I don't remember what it was, but a lump of money that I went and put into an IRA, right? Back in the day when I still had life insurance on myself, just in case anything happened for the kids, and I got rid of all that stuff. But anyways, I had been wrestling with it. There's I think I had like $6,000 or $8,000, next to nothing if you're looking at retirement and looking at the prospect that I'm not putting anything in there, haven't put anything in there for years. And, and then I'm reading stuff about the spirit prophecy along the way too, but I'm thinking, well, what do I need to do with that money though? Because I was feeling stuck. If I took it out, you pay the taxes on it and then you don't have it. So, you lose everything anyways. And so I just had a lot of these trying to figure out what to do and not wanting to have savings anymore because of what I was learning. And so I had all this stuff going on in my mind for about 6 months. And I already did a little bit of investigation, started realizing, well, if I took it all out and I just donated it all, it just goes through my income like a wash. This is my simple mind. I'm not that intelligent, okay? I'm thankful that for the Lord that I know what I know, because I'm not that intelligent. So I'm just thinking, well, if I did that, then it's just going to be a wash. I don't pay any taxes on it. God gets it all, and it's all done with. So I've been thinking about that for about 6 months, not sure how to go about it, did a little investigation, and then I'm sitting down here in early September, I believe it was, when I heard that David Gates presentation, and I don't remember everything that he said, but he's predicting this 2008 meltdown or whatever it was he was saying, and I don't remember everything that he said, but I know that I immediately got up after that sermon, got on my knees, and I said, Lord, I am not going to let any man tell me what to do. But I know that what I've been reading and what I've been understanding is that I need to put everything to you. And I don't remember everything I said in that prayer. And I can't remember the details to go into it, but I know that he answered my prayer and I knew exactly what to do. So I took the money out and I donated it off to, it was all gone and done and over with. And, and it went to General Adventists, probably Sac Central or Amazing Facts or anything like that. And I was sitting here thinking as we read this, he looks at our faith. And then I realized, you know what? He really doesn't need us, because we make mistakes or we do things like that. Go give your money to Amazing Facts when they're not the ones that are doing the work. He doesn't need us. What he wants is our faith. And my faith at that time said, even though you don't understand everything,
Amen.
You're willing to give it up for me. So he looks at our faith and and along the way. So anyways, I just wanted to praise God there for that.
What about all the money spent to FFA?
I know, same thing. All of our money with FFA that at the time it was theirs. So I don't know what to say about that.
That's what it was,
But at the same time, God did use those same.
Yes, he did.
Because I know that prior to, as you guys know by now, most of you, that I was home church. So I didn't have a place where I just put, a church to put my tithes and offerings. So I would just give it to independent ministries and, just mail it off to different places. the ministries that I was blessed by. Like I was a part of Present Truth Ministries. Well, not like a member, but I would listen in. I was listening to 3ABN. I was listening to the Hope Channel, you know, and a lot of those things at the time were blessings to me. And because they blessed me, I sent money to like high school, because I was blessed by this, you know, this is what God used to help me. So, you know, at the time I didn't know better, but that's.
But he looks at our faith and our willingness, because he doesn't need us and he doesn't need our money. He looks at our faith. Okay, so let's see here. So we're looking at Steve Bannon. There's other people in the Republican Party saying that we've taken this nation away from God and we need to establish Christianity as our state religion. We saw this push from 1861 to 1865. From the beginning of the Civil War, as a political move, recommended by a pastor, they begin to work of forming some type of religious phrase that will show God is on their side. They decide on the phrase "In God We Trust" in 1863, and the work of placing it on their coins begins in 1865. All of that needed to pass through Congress and the government. So I kind of highlighted that because we know that it's them that has to pass when it comes to like the people clamor to.
I'm surprised they got it passed though, didn't they? Some of the South, the people that are representing the South, you think they would block that? Your representative. Was it just the North that was running the government?
I don't know. Maybe somebody else knows more about that background and that history.
The North got Abraham Lincoln, who was a Northerner, on their side. And by that time, when they were making this phrase, the war had started, so the South wasn't a part of the North government anymore. They had seceded from all of America. Yeah, they had their own constitution.
Couldn't interfere anyways.
No, they couldn't. It's like us telling, you know, Russia, hey, can you pass this, you know.
Yeah.
I know the South had their own money currency.
So
all of this history.
Yeah, because that's the currency is what they put it on, yeah.
All of this history leads up to A.T. Jones' fight in Congress against the National Reform Movement. It was established in 1863 for the same reasons that this phrase was introduced, bringing religion into the Civil War on the side of the Republican Party. So we come to 2016 and the election. The year previously, February 2015, over 50% of Republican voters believed that Christianity, and I believe this was a Fox News poll, 50% of Republican voters believed that Christianity should be made the official religion of the United States. And it was particularly the young people that were pushing for that, which I think was it. I just look at it what the young people do now. It seems like they don't bother with anything. But yet it is the young people that play a role. And they are in other aspects.
They're playing a pretty good role right now with the climate control.
Yeah, they are. They are. What were you going to say, Adriana?
That quote, we can't find it.
Hey, that quote, yeah.
We didn't find that quote.
I came up at lunch. So, okay, so that poll was out by Fox News to test their base for their position on religion. Over 50% want the United States to recognize Christianity as their state religion, the very thing A.T. Jones fought against. Prior to that, all the way back in 2007, another poll was done. And to think about these are, if you're talking about the Republicans, these are kids that grew up in Christian homes that weren't really being Christian to begin with. And so their idea of Christianity is skewed to begin with, right? Okay. So prior to that, all the way back in 2007, another poll was done that showed that half of all Americans thought that Christianity was already the religion of the United States. That's what I would have thought back then.
Yeah, that's what we thought.
That's because it becomes so common when it's on your currency and in your classrooms, but it's not. A.T. Jones fought against it. If we went back to the study with the phrase "In God We Trust," we want to go a little further in history, forward. We're going to go forward in history and consider what's happening in the 1930s. In the 1930s, the business leaders found themselves in a difficult position. There had been the great crash she's talking about the Great Depression of 1929, and Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, which put pressure on these business leaders. They tried different methods to regain their power, but not much was working for them. What they began in the 1930s was a public relations campaign. What they wanted to do was connect capitalism to Christianity, which is what you were just reading about that guy Burt, right?
Mhm. That guy is just someone that Steve Bannon
Listen to, yeah, or
quoted, because the guy was in the
learned from.
1800s.
He
Yeah.
learned from, right? His philosophy.
Mhm.
Yeah. They found that the very best spokesmen were clergymen. Studies have shown that ministers can manipulate public opinion more than any other profession. So they begin this process of recruiting clergymen. They begin to hold prayer breakfasts in U.S. cities. This brought together corporate and political leaders in these Christian religious gatherings. So you're looking at the 30s, and I don't have it on here, but you're looking in here in the 30s, you've got Roosevelt introducing the New Deal, and it's putting pressure on the business leaders, and they want to look to regain more power back in here, and they're looking at what they can do, and they're finding that the clergymen are the ones that can manipulate the public most, and that they're now going to start recruiting, and they begin holding prayer breakfasts, and they're trying to entice and bring in clergymen. So they brought together corporate and political leaders in these Christian religious gatherings. So some of this is coming from an article in the New York Times, March 14th, 2015. It's titled "A Christian Nation Since When?" And they go through this history of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. So for time and pronunciation, we won't go through all the names they listed, but they named corporate leaders and clergymen particularly involved in this, and particularly a few pastors who became very famous. One of those in 1942, Reverend Abraham Garai, he persuaded the House and the Senate to start holding weekly prayer meetings to, quote, "in order that we might be a God-directed and God-controlled nation." He opened headquarters in Washington, which he named God's Embassy. He held dedication ceremonies at the inauguration of several justices of the Supreme Court. Now, I just got a question. Do these people, do they do this intentionally, or do they just not know what they're doing?
I think it's Satan leading.
Yeah, I don't think they realized. Because remember when we were on that side, we honestly thought that God would help this country, and if we just kept God in this country, everything would be good.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
why I'm
they have-
saying I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Because I myself said, well, things are happening because we took God out of our schools. He's no longer in our prayers. They cut down the 10 Commandments. So that was our way of thinking.
So they really think that they were doing right and good.
Well, as long as you're not reasoning from cause to effect and what that's going to look like when you actually do cause all these things, then no, you don't know what you're doing, especially if you also don't know history.
I was just going to say, if you don't remember the past, because that was what did Moses always tell him, to always remember the past, always
Exactly.
rehearse. So when they forget about what the Dark Ages was and why they came here, then they wind up in the same place. Because when you go in through the Great Controversy and you read that chapter in the Pilgrim Fathers, you'll see that they repeatedly kept making the same mistakes. They wanted to set up their own little section here where they could be themselves, but they were being prosperous, and the secular ones wanted to come in and join them. And they said, well, you can join us, but you have to be our religion. So here we are, the very ones that are trying to establish this separation say, okay, we're going to be living this separation, but if you want to join us, this is what we're doing. And so there goes the separation. So that's repeated in the Pilgrim Fathers.
But they don't like the implications of freedom once they see what they look like. They're like, these people are going to have freedom? Wait a minute. Every time you finally get face to face with the implications of what the beautiful truth you're talking about actually means, and the fact that it means you're going to make a sacrifice for the good of all people, then everyone's like, wait a minute. Yeah, I can't make a
But
sacrifice.
remember the French Revolution, when they realized that without God they cannot keep people under control. So this God supposedly they use it as a means to control people, the governments and the church and everybody.
So this guy, Pastor Everide, he opened headquarters in Washington, which he named God's Embassy. He held dedication ceremonies at the inauguration of several justices of the Supreme Court. The most famous clergyman who was doing this work, one that we should know, it began in the 30s.
Finish that sentence.
No, I'll start that sentence again, so go ahead.
What my mom just said, that's actually to the point, because you can't if it's just a secular government you have, you can protest against all the wrongs they're doing all the time. But if you're saying God is leading that government, if you protest against that government, that makes you immoral and that makes you a sinner. So when you combine a government with a church, now there's no way you can fight against it because you're fighting against God when you do that. Do you realize what they're doing? Because that's what the Catholic Church did, is if you fight against this ruler, then you're fighting against God and you're going to hell. Do you see what I'm saying? So you can't ever say that they're doing anything wrong because they're claiming God as their leader. And so you have America pushing all the other countries around, but it's a Christian nation. It's supposed to do that. That's, you know.
So when we say that, when we go against the government, they're saying we're going to hell. Yeah.
Because you have this issue with Snowden. He's back in the news this year. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on with him. And the news sources that I was watching, everyone is questioning him like he is some kind of horrible human being because of what he did. And I'm like, I'm sorry, if your government was killing babies, would you want to know that?
Yeah.
You know? And the statement he said is that sometimes the moral thing to do isn't legal because sometimes your government is bad and they make the moral thing to do an illegal thing. And so you guys need to listen and need to think for your own selves before you start making the short decisions.
I think I watched that same interview.
Yeah.
Okay, so the most famous clergyman who was doing this work, one that we should know, it began in the 30s, went through the 40s, and into the 50s. Where in the 50s, where there was a huge religious revival. The one clergyman we should have already known is Billy Graham. One London paper called him the biggest business evangelist. They say he spoke to more people since Jesus. He influenced tens of millions of people, but he was politically motivated. He once said the Garden of Eden was a paradise because it had no unions, no labor leaders. He mixed politics with his message. He endorsed political candidates and influenced presidents, particularly Eisenhower. He attacked all government restrictions on economic affairs using his favorite word, or one favorite word, that we're going to hear a lot this year and next year. He said government restriction is socialism.
You know what's funny about Billy Graham, the way he had some of Ellen White's books on his shelf, and he knew about the Sabbath. But when he preached, he said, don't forget to go to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
So he wants to talk about a hit.
So this Varide, 1935, Varide was founded the prayer breakfast movement in the United States. In 1944, International Christian Leadership began in Washington, D.C. Varide was the executive director of this organization until his death in '69. He was part of a peace conference in San Francisco after World War II. In '53, Varide and the fellowship started Presidential Prayer Breakfast, later called National Prayer Breakfast or the International Prayer Breakfast. He was editor for the Christian Citizen together with Captain Leonard Larson. And there's a picture of him there. So they're calling these government restrictions socialism.
Yeah, to go back to Billy Graham, isn't his daughter now that's fighting for bringing religion in schools?
I think so.
I heard him.
Yeah.
What's that again? What's he doing?
His daughter.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, she's fighting his father's,
What is Christina doing?
What's Billy Graham's daughter and Jerry Falwell Jr.
Right.
Those
Okay.
are the two that I think Tess brings out as trying to bring church and stay back in again.
Yeah.
So I did put in, and we're going to get to this line just a little bit. We don't get into it a whole lot, but we're just kind of putting it there to begin with. But it's going to line up with the date here, one of these dates back in here, the 63. And we'll see how it's linked to how this symbol of the 2520 is linked from this midway point to this midway point. You've got a union of church and state here. You've got a union of church and state happening here. And we're going to see where this one leads to. So when we come to our history, we're saying 2019 to 2020, we can see it on more evidences that but that they're going to be attacking what they're going to be attacking is the idea of socialism. Now, she saw this long before I know I did, obviously, but you guys may have seen it a lot sooner. I didn't make any socialism connection back in October. For me, I just recently been getting that connection. I did make the difference between the red hat and the blue hat that people were calling us Democrats just because we were speaking the way we were about Trump. So Okay, so we need to protect the United States from socialists, is what they're saying. We talked about the 50s beginning with the McCarthy era, and that was probably at the camp meeting because I know we haven't gone through it in our classes, so they didn't go through it in the classes. Maybe it's something she did in the camp meeting, but looking at the McCarthy era. And I had to look it up because she kept saying John, and I was pretty sure it was Joseph. So I looked it up. It is Joseph McCarthy. So in the McCarthy era, Joseph McCarthy was, but that's a different story. In 1952, Billy Graham goes to Washington and he speaks to Congress. He holds the first formal religious gathering on the steps of the Capitol, and at his introduction, Congress established a National Day of Prayer. We've got 1952, we're marking Eisenhower here. He said, if I would run for president, this is Billy Graham, of the United States on a platform of calling people back to God, back to Christ, back to the Bible, he said I would be elected. One journalist, John Temple Graves, wrote in this history, America according to Dwight Eisenhower, elected in 52, one of the most influenced by Billy Graham, Dwight Eisenhower, according to this journalist, doesn't see America as the land of the free, but it's the land of freedom under God. He was inaugurated. So how is there freedom? If you're under God, how is that actually freedom? Because what if you're an atheist? What if you're something else, right? So it's not actually freedom. So he was inaugurated in 1953. Eisenhower was, right? I think it's Eisenhower. He was inaugurated in 1953, and on the Sunday morning after his inauguration, he was baptized. That Sunday night, he sent out the White House address for what was known as the Back to God campaign. He appeared with Pastor Baride at the inaugural National Prayer Breakfast. And on the Friday, he introduced opening prayers at cabinet meetings. The other agencies followed him and instituted prayer services, such agencies as the Pentagon and in the State Department. I think it's and the State Department. The reason we wanted to discuss this history is this phrase, in God we trust, is pushed again. So in this history here, we're going to see the phrase, in God we trust, pushed again. It begins in the history of the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and in 1863 it's actually formed. In the 50s, it's pushed again. It's added to postage stamps. In 1954, Congress adds it to the Pledge of Allegiance. So we've got the Pledge of Allegiance here in 1954, and in God We Trust is added. Now you have to declare your allegiance under God if you're going to have an allegiance with the United States. In 1956, it becomes an official motto of the United States. And 1956 is where it lines up here with the 63 to 2019. Everybody kind of follow that? I didn't really go into it, but we understand that the 63 is half of the 126. So what we're seeing is a union of church and state at this midway point, which is connected by the 2520, marking this midway point where there's a union of church and state. We're also seeing a union of church and state.
Why did you say 126? Did you mean the 151?
The 151, yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you. So this one's the 151. So then we're seeing, this as a union of church and state. We're seeing this as a union of church and state connected by the 2520, the 151, not the 126, okay? So then here in 1956, we're seeing that the official motto is now in God We Trust. The 63 years is half of the 126. It's a midway point, marking a midway point between the 126. So in the 56 takes you to 2019. Let's keep going then. So let me see where we're at. Are we right here? Yeah, the reason we wanted to discuss this history, let's see, no, we're at the very bottom, I think. We're jumping ahead of ourselves, but we're going to discuss the number 63. It's half of 126. So it becomes significant, but we haven't yet discussed that number or 2019. We're just placing it there. Everybody kind of understand that? Any questions on it?
No.
You're seeing the Union of Church and State trail, the threads, the needle thread? And who does it come from? The North or the South, so to speak?
North.
Comes from the North, comes from the Republicans. Although the Republicans are in the South now. They changed their location. This is the history of the Cold War in this period of time when this is going on. This is the history of the Cold War. To distinguish itself from the Soviet Union, part of the reason behind the 50s in these decisions was to make a strong difference between the United States and the Soviet Union. In this official motto, In God We Trust, we replaced an unofficial motto that the United States had held since 1782. This unofficial motto written in Latin meant out of many, one, completely secular, no religious connotation. What it was referencing by the many was the states. Many states, one nation. So you've got e pluribus unum, meaning out of many, one. Many states, one nation. And this is what they replaced in 1856 when they put the official motto of In God We Trust. America held it from 1782 to 1956. The same day that Dwight Eisenhower signed this legislation, he signed another piece of legislation that by law, this phrase had to be placed on every piece of American currency. Back in 1865, it was just the coins it would fit on. Now, by law, it must be placed on everything. In 1863, if 1863 is 2014, 1863 is 2014, both midway points, then what are these two dates? 1861 and 1865. So we want to find out what 1861, and we've already kind of talked about it, in 1865 represent. So what is 1865 in our history? It's the end of Civil War. In their history, it's the end of the Civil War. Remember that we've placed 1863 because it's midpoint, and we got this model from the Millerite history and our history. So what is 1865 then? It would be 2019. 1863 is 2014, or midway between 9/11 and 2019. So 1861 up here, 1861 is 9/11. It's the beginning, then there's a turning point, and then there's an end point. So we have the beginning, we have a turning point, and an end point. The beginning of In God We Trust being placed on the currency. In 1956, it must be placed by law. This is the coming together of church and state that began in the 1930s by the business leaders as a business decision and by the political leaders, particularly once we got into the McCarthy era as a fight against socialism. Remember Joseph McCarthy, his whole message is conspiracy theories, but Dwight Eisenhower is influenced particularly by Billy Graham. So at 9/11, or before September, in March 2001, a campaign began in one state, and I wanted to look this one up, but I don't know why I had less time this week than I normally have, and I even missed the Bible studies. But anyways, I wanted to look this one up to verify it because she wasn't sure. She said Mississippi. That In God We Trust had, by law, had to be written into every public school classroom. It had to be displayed in every public school classroom and in all their cafeterias and all other rooms in the schools. It began in one state in 2001, and states are still introducing it in 2018. So since 2001, that idea has been spreading. So you've got them wanting to put it in 9/11, wanting to put In God We Trust. It's interesting that that campaign, it says, started in March prior to September in Mississippi instead of after 9/11. So then we have September 11, and this word In God We Trust became much more prominent as a response to the war with Islamic terrorism. We've already discussed Steve Bannon in this history. What he's fighting for is the protection of the West to remain as he sees the West should be. Is Brother Victor still with us?
Yes, we're here.
Oh, good, okay. Because I was just thinking about your questions earlier. Is this helping?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm gonna put another article where it goes in depth into what Steve Bannon was writing in 2014 and his beliefs on this country is like quoted from him.
Again, be sure.
Yeah, he literally looked at all the leaders in U.S. history and said the ones that actually did a good job, the capital leaders, were the ones who are Christian and brought their Christian ideals into their work. So literally a combination of church and state.
Yeah.
That's what he was looking for, was a leader who would bring church and state together, literally. Anyways.
And they must have seen Ted Cruz as the one to be able to do it.
You have to wage who's on top. So while Ted Cruz was up, they were financing him. The moment Ted Cruz went down, who's the greatest? Trump. That's next. But it wasn't. Trump wasn't doing that well when it first started out. Ted Cruz was doing a little better.
So we've already discussed Steve Bannon in that history. What he's fighting for is the protection of the West to remain as he sees the West should be. He has this concept of the West as a patriarchal country. I think you just mentioned that word as well, as Christian and as white. He doesn't like to admit that last one so easily, but the motivation behind what Steve Bannon is pushing is some type of protection against secular influence and Islamic influence. What he's bringing together is church and state. He began that work in 2014. He won a huge victory in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump. But it's not just Steve Bannon, it's what's happening in this history from March 2001. The governor of Arkansas ran for president in 2015. He said that the United States is declining because they've lost sight of God, of their divine origin of laws and customs. He was calling for the United States as a nation to return to God. The vast majority of his supporters were calling for the United States to be recognized as a Christian nation by the government.
He really is. The Sunday Law in 2014.
In connecting this history, what is fascinating is how we see the similarities between Adventism and the United States. We both head off course in 1863. We're familiar with what the course of Adventism has been. We're familiar with 1888, 1893, 1909, those issues within the church and our prophetic message. We come to our history and there's darkness and confusion. Not everyone came out of darkness in 1989. They're still in darkness because they've forgotten their point of early history. What they see around them, they think is completely normal. What we need to do and become familiar with is that you can say the same for the external, probably worded wrong, in God We Trust, should never be heard by the government or of the United States on the currency or as a motto in the public schools. But it's been progressively going wrong for so long that when we come into our history, the Republican Party was losing the Civil War under Obama, and it seems normal for the American people to see the United States as a Christian nation and think that it is something to be defended. But it's no more normal for the government to say, in God we trust, than for the conference president to reject the 2520. It's the same way, Mark. The problem is, if you're immersed in that church or that culture, you've been so long, it just looks normal. How do we understand the Republican horn of Antigonus in relation to this? This is another question from the group. How do we understand the Republican horn or Antigonus in relation to this? This is civil war. There's two sides, like there's two streams of information. In 2016, we could have seen a side win that would not have repeated this history, but prophetically, it's already placed, and there's only one side that's bringing in church and state. There's only one side that introduced In God We Trust in this history and pushed for the national reform movement. But the problem is, we're so accustomed to the same thinking of the people in this history that we think the United States is in decline. We think it's because of immorality and gay marriage and secularism. I know that's what I was long into my Adventist walk, that it's all about immorality. But it's this linking of church and state that is the problem, because now you're taking away people's right to choose. And you're placing the church on using the civil to make moral laws.
What about abortion? Is that murder still, or What about that issue?
That issue always comes up, and I don't know that I've seen it in discussions to really. I don't know. I haven't seen. I have not. I've seen the issue come up, but I've not seen it really discussed. So I can't say. I don't know.
Wouldn't it still be the same? Everyone has the right to choose.
That's what I kind of
Yeah.
wondered.
Why would it be different?
I think we did talk about it at once, but I don't know if we were connected to everybody when we talked about it. But you know, those choices can have been made pre-knowledge of God anyways, and be made based on the fact that I had the right to choose. And but if we'd have known God, we would have never been doing the things that, well, it depends on the situation, because some are not doing them of their own free choice.
Well, even more so, Satan rules, and it's not that we didn't know God, I guess, in a sense, but
Yeah.
you know, it's just the way the world has become.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we're buying into the exact same argument that they fell for. If we bring together Adventism in the United States, it becomes clear what has happened. What has declined is not the morality. That is not what's leading to the destruction of the United States. If we believe that we have to be able to place that prophetically, we can't. If we believe that, we have to be able to place it prophetically, and we can't. Time and time again, we have evidence that it's because of this work of church and state and the enforcement of it. One more thought, it becomes so clear how the prophetic model of Ipsos shows Hillary Clinton as the actual last hope, and hope in making America great again. What does he mean when he says, make America great? She's talking about Trump. Because I can guarantee you he's not meaning the history of 1782, that brief history between 1798 and 1844, when it had two separate horns. He's not meaning this history. Back in this history, there was no In God We Trust, no national reform movement, where A.T. Jones said we're not a Christian nation. Joseph McCarthy had a famous lawyer. She doesn't elaborate on this, and again, it was one of those things I wanted to look up, but I was running out of time again. So Joseph McCarthy had a famous lawyer, Roy Cohen. Is he related to Michael Cohen? I asked that because of what she said. She just didn't say, and I didn't get to look it up. So maybe somebody has a chance to look that up. So Joseph McCarthy had a famous lawyer, Roy Cohen. He works for Joseph McCarthy. Then he mentored Donald Trump, because McCarthy's back quite a ways. So that's why I was wondering if there's some kind of link there, or was it actually Roy Cohen that did mentor Donald Trump at some point? They have the same mentality and going to use the same tactics as Joseph McCarthy. The 1950s were prosperous years. When Donald Trump wants to make America great again, we can guarantee you he's talking about this history. And you have Billy Graham, and America was prosperous. But we should know that that's not a good thing coming up for church and state.
There's a couple headlines that says Roy Cohen is how we got Trump. Another one says the final lesson Donald Trump never learned from Roy Cohen. And then there's a lot of them. And we are all living in the world Roy Cohen created. That's a question. So yeah, they're connected.
Yeah, I have to check it out. So whether he mentored him like side by side kind of thing, or mentored him through writings or influenced him, I don't know. So, but this was the one that was working for Joseph McCarthy at that time. So when Donald Trump wants to make America great again, thank you, Sister Tony, thank you. We can guarantee you he's talking about the history where you have Billy Graham and America was prosperous. So he wants to make America great again. He wants to restore prosperity to the nation. So they clamor for the union of church and state. And we've been witnessing that since 2014, clamoring for the union of church and state by the people to restore prosperity to the nation.
Is that Cohen spelled C-O-H-N?
C-O-H-E-N. Oh yeah, his is C-O-H-N.
C-O-H-E-N.
Had an article, they're different.
There's an article that just came out yesterday on him too with it.
So that was the end of that one. Open for discussion now too. Are we seeing what I know I've been blinded to for so long? And seeing what, what a blessing that Tess was, she's had 2 years in putting all this together and seeing it. So when they go out and present these, do these presentations, they know what we don't get. Does that make sense? Back in October, they know what we don't get. They know what they're seeing. They know that it's right. They know that it's true, and they want to tell us what they're doing the best they can to present the message to a people that are slow in understanding. Well, I'm speaking for myself, and they know what we don't get. And but I thank God that He's given us this time to be able to process and choose whether or not we would look into these things ourselves to see if they're so. Because where it's led me, at least in my own personal understanding here, is a better grasp of what is happening, connecting the dots and seeing how it trails to, if you really want to look at there's a lot of themes, but this theme of this union of church and state and what it means and how you can, when we first heard, when Brother Jonathan first messaged me that in Canada, that she was saying that there's not an actual Sunday law, it made sense to me right off the bat. But then I started looking up quotes and started finding those quotes that talk about it, that the union of church and state is the acceptance of a spurious Sabbath. So we're not to accept the union of church and state. And that's what they were doing during the Civil War. That's what they were doing in the 50s. And that's what they're now doing here. But the link to all that is that those dates are connected by symbols of the 2520, pointing to us the message of time so that we would know where we're at in history. So that's another aspect of things. While we were looking at Ipsis and Heraclea, that's a whole other aspect of things. So maybe we should open up the discussion for what's in the news currently on signs of possible what Raphia is and what's happening with Raphia.
I was doing that, but I don't know how that's going to work anymore because her Germany presentations, if you understand how Raphia looks like from that aspect, it changes. So if you want to look at Raphia, you can start looking in 2003.
In 2003?
Yeah. And yeah, but it's so much. I'm so confused now. I don't know anymore.
Comments?
I just have one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this study was a real eye-opener. Of course, from the Adventist group I was with, they weren't even involved in politics or anything going on out there. You didn't talk about that. And, I really see, that, man, there's just no preparation at all if they don't have this background here.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad. And of course, for Adventists too. And I'm just so thankful that the Lord placed it on my heart that something was missing and there was no light coming through to prepare us for the end time. And I knew it was the end time. And we were talking about being the end time. But, without this history and without this message from the Lord, it's just going to leave you with nothing. There's no preparation. And one other thing too, it's this last couple of pages here on this study about why, I hope I can get this right in my head, the morality issue. And that wasn't the reason, as I'm seeing now, that church and state, make this a Christian nation. It's not about the morality.
And that's the whole time you're talking, my mind is back to what I said earlier in the day. And I'll let you talk again. I apologize if I cut you off. I couldn't tell if you were done. I apologize.
No, go ahead.
Okay, because I was watching and waiting to jump in and say this, and that because I made a statement earlier that that's what I came to realize when I was watching this study and putting together the notes, is it's never been about morality. It's about your right to choose. If you want to live an immoral life, you have the right to choose to live an immoral life. There's no civil laws that are supposed to dictate morality. And so when they unite church and state, they start enforcing more morality, but which I think is like, I might use the wrong term. Oh, I don't want to use the wrong term, embarrass myself. But you look at who Donald Trump is today and what the Christians want to call morality, none of them have the right to say that we're going to enforce morality. But yet that's what they want to do it for, is to enforce morality. And it was not about morality. It was about the right to choose. So I apologize if I cut you off. That's why I made the statement that I did earlier today.
Yeah.
All about this union.
Glad you did, because that really spoke to me, you know, that this is what I hear all around me, and, you know, for quite a long time. Of course, that, you know, Sunday laws will come about because the people are looking at to see the terrible condition the world is in, and they, especially America, and they'll want to bring in God, and that's what will cause the Sunday law. That's the rationale, but they don't really see the real context of this. Of, you know, it's not about the morality. It goes back to that.
Yeah, they're doing what they did in the Civil War, and they're doing what they did in the 1950s. They're saying that we have all these judgments because we don't have God, but we have all these judgments because we don't have equality. We don't have, racism isn't gone, gender, sexism isn't gone, and conspiracy theories aren't gone. These are the issues that are actually bringing judgment. It's not that we don't have God, and so they have their eyes on the wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, that's an eye-opener right there to me. You know, it just opens up a whole new way of thinking here. So I see. And, you know, to sit down, try to talk to somebody about this. I mean, some of my closest friends, one Catholic and one ex-Catholic, and they would just, where their thinking is right now, would be, oh yeah, this would be great. You know, they took God out of the schools. They took God out of this and God out of that. No wonder we're going downhill. You know, I mean, that's the thinking. And I was thinking the same way.
Me too.
Yeah, it's, and yet, you know, you're going to be completely deceived if you're thinking that way.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What really brings on the judgment, though? Because if there was always sexism and racism in history, then why you know what I'm asking? Like,
well, if I'm understanding correctly, what brings on the judgment is this union of church and state.
okay, so then it's not racism or sexism.
No, let Adriana
The Civil
go.
War started before the church and state in '63 union, right?
That was slavery. Yes, that was slavery. Oh, correct.
Yeah, so slavery is what brought the judgments.
Yeah, then. Is she talking about now, and is it going to be the same?
It's the same, so it's the same pattern, because in
Yep.
the 1950s, you have, again, the issue of racial equality with the civil rights movement, and you have the religious right trying to bring in God We Trust, or whatever it was, prayer in schools. I don't remember which one it was back then also. And whatever they were seeing a crisis, and they were seeing God judgments then too. And they were
okay, thank you.
Because the judgments that they were seeing during the Civil War was the war itself. They were saying, this is God's judgment. We need to get God in here so that he's not angry with us. During the 1950s, they were saying, look at this huge crisis, this judgment, this atheism, the Cold War. Russia is what they were looking at, and they were super paranoid about socialists everywhere in the United States. So they said, this atheism is spreading everywhere. God's judgment is on us. We need to just get God back in the United States. And now we have calamities, and we have economic crashes. We have natural disasters everywhere, and they're saying we're in a crisis. Obama took all God out of the state. We need to get God back in there. So the judgments change.
Yeah, thank you for giving that, pulling that better out, that right answer. So it starts with, it starts with judgments that are coming but then they go and use God to try to remove the judgments. Is that kind of what you said?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
To
they
remove the
think
judgments.
they're
So they want to
looking at
unite church and state to stop the
they're
judgments.
looking at the wrong source for God's judgments. They
Yeah.
think it's that God isn't involved anymore, but it's because they're not being equal to their fellow man is usually the issue that's involved always.
And I just think it's interesting. I'm gonna get my Bible because I don't even have it out. When you go into James, and because it says it right there, it's talking about the rich man, because that's where it finally goes to, right? Let me find it. Is it James chapter 5? Yeah, chapter 5. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of your laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. So the cries, like when you go back into Egypt, the cries of the people were reaching up to heaven. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you.
This is in James 5.
James 5.
That sounds like Revelation 18 a little bit.
Yeah. And then it goes on to say, be patient therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and the latter rain. And if we consider that in the context of what we're learning, that the rain that the Nethinims are getting, that they're getting their plowing, they get their rain from these events, not from us. Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take, my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy to which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. So it is about this oppression that is happening, and the people are crying out. I think about that when I, some of the African brethren that I share with and pray, we have so much. It seems like no matter how much you have, you always have a reason to complain, right? And the Lord has been merciful in helping us to see that. But there are those that have far less. There are those that, like I said, that are literally living in those refugee camps. That are literally living under persecution from their own families because they've accepted this message. They've been deprived the right to go to the privilege of being able to go to school. The parents disown them because they accept this message. They've got much more to endure at this point than we're having to deal with. And we just need to pray and lift up the brethren around the world, because all have different circumstances and have to bear through and be patient while this work completes, so that people can understand the oppression that people are under. So it is this slavery and this oppression by the rich man. And I want to say it's in Ezekiel, maybe somebody remembers where it's at. I want to say it's Ezekiel, early on in Ezekiel. But that they're going to throw their gold and their silver in the streets because they come to realize that it can't save them. Maybe somebody remembers where that one's at. So there's a lot of it in there. And then we were talking about at lunch, kind of a change of subject, I guess, but we were talking at lunch about, I know there's a verse that I read I've read it many times, but prior to understanding the message and the truths that we're learning now. But I always read it as if it had something to do with the oil that's going on. And if anybody watched that video that Sister Tamina posted about the Hermosa Strait, is that what it was called?
The Strait of Hermes.
Strait of Hermosa. And because that's where all the oil comes out of. And if anybody ever finds that verse, I want to say it's in Isaiah someplace, maybe it's Ezekiel. It's kind of hard to look up, as Robert said, why don't you just do a search oil? And I'm like, yeah, like Adriana said, 2,000 hits. But I don't remember what it said to go back and know what the actual historical fulfillment and context of it was to be able to, because I couldn't remember it enough. So if anybody ever runs across that verse, I'd be happy to receive it from you and be able to look at it again. But I always thought it had to be.
What's the verse again? What's the, I don't understand.
Talking about oil, the oil being coming in, and it's referring to the oil as being part of their. I can't give you much because I can't remember, but I know that just roughly what I remember is that it seems to be referring to the oil coming back and forth for the trade and the riches between the nations.
Okay.
And that's all I could remember of it, and I could never find it. I'll just have to come across it when I'm reading. And like I said, I don't know if it's Isaiah or Ezekiel, and so I don't, because Adriana brought up, well, you have to know, Parminder says you have to know the original. I said, yeah, I can't even remember where to find it though, to get to the original. But I always thought it had to do with the oil being over in the east and what goes on there. So somebody will find it. There's enough of us minds together that somebody will find it.
What are some words? It's from the Bible, what you're saying?
The only one I can find that I can figure out is oil. Maybe the word east was in there. It might have had something to do with Arabs. One of the words that might link you to Arabs.
Okay, I'm having a quick check here.
And I just don't remember.
Is that real? No way.
Was it Ezekiel 16? It says, "Thus wast thou decked with gold and silver, and thy raiment was of fine linen."
No. It actually, no.
I think I just looked in Isaiah and there was only 2 mentions of oil.
No way.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, maybe it's not in Isaiah then, because I think I might have done that before. But oil, maybe I have done that before and was shocked myself that there's not that many references to oil in Isaiah. What ones were they?
One was talking about the oil tree, just a bunch of trees, and the other one was talking about something and a good thing of oil. Something.
Maybe it's Ezekiel. Everybody's quiet. Maybe everybody's looking.
Oh, Judah and the land of Israel, they were thy merchants. They traded in thy market wheat of Minnith and Penag and honey and oil and balm. Damascus was the merchant in the multitudes of the wares of thy making.
Is that Ezekiel?
For the multitude of all riches. Yeah, it's Ezekiel 27:17. Oh, then will I make their waters deep and cause their rivers to run like oil? No.
Is it Hosea 12:1?
Seventh one from the 15th table.
Yeah, Hosea 12:1. Ephraim feedeth on wind and followeth after the east wind. The daily increaseth lies and desolation, and they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt.
Yeah, that's the one. Where's that at?
Hosea 12:1. Christine just posted it.
Hosea 12:1. Thank you, Christine. I'm gonna go find it real quick so we can look at it.
Ephraim feedeth on wind and follows after the east wind.
12:1, did you say?
He daily increased his
Yeah.
lies and desolation.
Yep.
That's the one that I've always seen and wondered it didn't have it. So we'd have to look at the original context of it. Whoever has the better mind here. Because you got the east wind in there. You got wind, and then you have east wind. You got lies and desolation.
You got a covenant.
Covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt. So we'd have to go back and look at the history.
So Ephraim was the 10 northern tribes, right?
Uh-huh.
And they were the ones who made a covenant with the Assyrians. So it was from the 10 northern tribes that the oil was carried into Egypt because they made a covenant of trade with the Assyrians.
I found one that speaks about children.
And if Assyria was the young lion and the lion was Babylon, then it would be talking about between Protestants and their mom papacy, isn't it?
Maybe. I'll probably have to read the chapter before.
Because in the next verse is the Lord hath also a controversy with Judah. So he's talking about the controversy God has with Protestant, well, whoever the northern tribes represent. And then also with God's people, he has controversy with them. So, I don't know.
Well, thank you. At least we have the verse, and I know how to highlight.
Mark it.
I did. I highlighted it in here, and I don't normally.
You're gonna lose it. You gotta write it down, Cal.
Well, I'll mark it in my Bible too, but I marked it in there. I have it right here. Okay. Anybody else? Comments? Thoughts?
I'm taking it off.
You take it off? Okay. Happy Sabbath. Glad you made it through the whole thing. Hosea 12:1. Isaiah, Hosea. Interesting, I did have it marked in here. So I must have found it since I've had this Bible. Okay, everybody's really quiet.
Waiting for the answer.
Oh, I don't have an answer. I got my answer. I was looking for the verse.
I don't even know what the question was.
Well, because I always read that verse before I knew any of this stuff. Just basic knowledge of Middle East, and that's where all the oil is. I always read that is it must have something to do with what's going on in the oil and all the East. And it came to my mind again the other day when Sister Tamina posted that video. So that was all. So
what video is this? Is this like the bunch of different videos she was posting?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was what'd you guys say? The Strait of
Hormuz.
Where
No, it's
what,
not
20, where all the ships are, is Iran that's attacking the oil ships that are going through there? Correct? Did I say that right?
Strait of Hormuz.
Those little Vox documentaries that were on YouTube, they're like, what are they, like less than 10 minutes? And they kind of give you information on whatever the topic is. And there's a couple on the Strait of Hormuz and then the Iraq war, I think. Iraq, Iran. Yeah.
Hosea, it would take understanding the book of these chapters in Hosea to get back into it, because I know the beginning of Hosea is chapter 3 is talking about how the separation and that Israel wasn't going to be a people until the latter days, and going on that is where it refers to them as sisters. Judah and Israel, they're sisters, and we have to go through that, and plus the marriage thing is throughout here. Taking the wife.
Who does Assyria represent?
Well, Assyria was the young lion, if that's what you mean, historically, the young lion.
Present tense.
No, go, what is this?
It looks like you're using an ad blocker.
Just wanted to see. Okay.
That's what it says, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I had the picture of where that is.
Just reset the page. Should open it.
There. So it's how they're getting oil in and out of this area here, which is connected to Iran. So 20% of the world's oil comes from this region through this little strait right here. This little, yeah, strait.
And that's where they've been having the recent problems
Yeah,
as well, right?
The Strait of Hormuz. It's been going on for quite
For a
some
long time,
time.
yeah.
But recently been kicking it up a notch.
That corner there, it almost looks like Somalia, like there's some, like the horn, like I don't know if you look at Africa and you look at like the horn part, where North Africa where Somalia is, Dubai looks like it's similar to it. Form of it. I don't know about now, but an older map I looked at, Dubai looks like Somalia.
Well, it's kind of interesting when you think about all the oil in these different places and how they're all enemies. How they ought to, if they were to get along and put together. But anyways, what was said in that video, if I understood correctly, that that it has the potential of shutting down the world's economy through what's going on through there. Maybe if somebody has that link, they can send it to Sister Tiffany or post it in here for everybody.
They were calling it the carotid artery of the world's economy, which is the oil. So you have Iran coming down on the Strait of Hormuz, and you have who knows who might have, shot down those oil tankers in Saudi Arabia, but there's a big attack on oil right now. Whoever it is, we can't say.
It's all directly related to Trump pulling out of that Iran deal, though, hey? Because that Iran deal,
yes,
goes all the way back to the 80s, and there was a time when Iran was shooting at these tankers that were going through there in the 80s because of it. Whatever happened between I can't remember how it worked, but the Iran-Iraq war that happened, when was that? Early 80s or late 70s?
The Iraq war started in 2000. Is that the one you're talking about?
Iran and Iraq. They
that
had a
was
war
between 79 and 89, I believe, right?
Was it 89? Okay.
Between 79 and 89.
Are you
talking about the 10-year, not the 10-year war, different?
No, that 10-year war was Afghanistan and Russia.
Okay.
The Iraq war is what?
But anyways, the Iran-Iraq war, the leverage that Iran has is the Strait of Hormuz. So whatever it was that America, I have to watch the video again.
Iran-Iraq war, different.
Oh, it's both of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to type in both.
Yeah, it's a different war.
Yeah, that was.
But whatever happened between, there was an agreement that was had, and America pulled out of it, and then Iran started shooting at oil tankers, and that's exactly what happened here. Just a month ago, when Trump pulled out of the agreement with Iran. Well, I guess that was a little while ago, and then Iran started hijacking these oil tankers, the British one and the Japanese one. And now this missile attack on Saudi Arabia, I can only assume it's because of this deal, because it really puts Iran in a tight spot. I'll see if I can find, it wasn't the video that Tamina posted, it was one of the ones that played after it, but they were all from Vox.
So 80 to 88.
Yeah.
I was close. I said 79 to 89.
No, it is 79. Well, that's what Elder Tess says. She says 79 to 89. So
no, that's the Afghanistan and Russian war.
Oh,
this was 80 to 89, 80 to 88.
I thought it's the.
No, that's interesting. It says that the the conflict has been compared to World War I in terms of the tactics used. See, they do compare and contrast. In Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's a developing situation to keep our eyes on for sure.
So what are our thoughts on Rafia? What are our thoughts on November 9?
Internal or external?
Whoops.
Oh.
Sorry about that. That was YouTube. Internal or external?
Well, both, but I'm thinking external.
external, I don't know if you heard the news today, but Iran is now saying that they're going to destroy anyone who, what did they say? I just have to find that article.
Hey, Jeremy, can I get a water?
They're going to destroy any aggressors. And that was right after Saudi Arabia came out and said that they were going to take, as soon as they were confirmed who was responsible, they were going to take action. So Iran comes out and says they're going to destroy any aggressors. So it's heating up over there, and we all know this is all proxies within proxies. If you consider Yemen and Syria, which were the two proxy wars, but then you have the bigger proxies, which are Saudi Arabia and Iran, and ultimately it's just the U.S. and Russia and everything. I don't know. It's heating up.
Were you gonna play that video? Somebody gonna play that video or no? Was somebody gonna do that?
video?
I don't know. I thought somebody was getting ready to play a video. Maybe mine.
I was looking to give a link for, the video that Tamina posted the other day. If you watch, I don't know if it'll work the same on your computer, but they're the next like one or two that came after it. One of them had to do with how the whole Iran-Iraq war started or whatever. Then there was another one about the Afghanistan war. It was quite interesting.
In the chat, I put a link to the Middle East Cold War Explained, and that's the video that comes right after the.
That's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of them.
The Middle East is one of the most complex regions in the world. Currently, there are 4 failing states and 3 wars, with major powers increasingly taking opposite sides. Countless armed militias and terrorist groups are spreading violence across borders. The region has seen conflict after conflict going back well into the 20th century. But among all the uprisings, civil wars, and insurgencies, 2 countries always seem to be involved: Saudi Arabia and Iran. They're bitter rivals, and their feud is the key to understanding conflicts in the Middle East. The Saudis and Iranians have never actually declared war on each other. Instead, they fight indirectly by supporting opposing sides in other countries and inciting conflicts. This is known as proxy warfare, and it's had a devastating effect on the region. Countries, especially poor ones, can't function if there are larger countries pulling strings within their borders.
Both the Saudis and the Iranians see these civil wars as both tremendous threats and also potentially enormous opportunities.
The Saudi-Iranian rivalry has become a fight over influence, and the whole region is a battlefield. It's why the rivalry is being called a Cold War. The most famous Cold War was fought for 40 years between the United States and Soviet Union.
Looking forward to the day when their flag would fly over the entire world.
They never declared war on each other, but clashed in proxy wars around the world. Each side supported dictators, rebel groups, and intervened in civil wars to contain the other. Like the US and Soviet Union, Saudi Arabia and Iran are 2 powerful rivals. But instead of fighting for world dominance, they're fighting over control of the Middle East. In order to understand the Saudi-Iranian rivalry, let's go back to the origins of each country. In the early 1900s, the Arabian Peninsula was a patchwork of tribes under the control of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, the empire collapsed, leaving these tribes to fight each other over power. One tribe from the interior, the Al Saud, eventually conquered most of the peninsula. In 1932, they were recognized as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. 6 years later, massive oil reserves were discovered in Saudi Arabia, and in an instant, the Saudi monarchy was rich. That oil money built roads and cities all around the desert country, and it helped forge an alliance with the US. On the eastern side of the Persian Gulf, another country was emerging, but having a much harder time. Iran also had massive oil reserves and an even bigger Muslim population. But constant foreign intervention was creating chaos. Since the 18th century, Iran had been invaded by the Russians and the British twice. In 1953, the US secretly staged a coup, removing the popular Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. In his place, they propped up a monarch, Reza Shah, who was aggressively reforming Iran into a secular, westernized country. But he harbored corruption and terrorized the population with his secret police, the Savak. By the 1970s, both Saudi Arabia and Iran had oil-based economies and had governments heavily backed by the US. But the feelings among each population were very different.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, the Shah of Iran, powerful as he was, simply didn't have the same control over his people or ultimately the same legitimacy and affection that the Saudi people felt toward their monarchy at that point in time.
That's because Iran's Muslims felt stifled by the Shah's reformations, and by the end of the decade, they finally fought back.
Iran's Islamic Revolution overthrew a powerful regime that boasted military might.
It's really in 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution overthrow the Shah, that the real tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia began.
Ayatollah Khomeini was a Muslim clergyman who preached against Western-backed secular monarchies. He advocated for a government that was popular, Islamic, and led by the clergy. And in 1979, he led a revolution to establish just that. It was a massive international event that prompted reactions around the world, especially in Saudi Arabia.
The Iranian Revolution terrified the government of Saudi Arabia. They were fearful that Ayatollah Khomeini would inspire their populations to rise up against them exactly the way that he had caused the Iranian population to rise up against the Shah.
And there was a religious threat too. Up until now, the Saudis had claimed to be the leaders of the Muslim world, largely because Islam's two holiest sites, Mecca and Medina, are in Saudi Arabia. But Khomeini claimed his popular revolution made Iran the legitimate Muslim state. And there is another divide. Saudi Arabia's population is mostly Sunni, the majority sect of Islam, while Khomeini and Iran are mostly Shia.
Westerners always make a mistake in drawing an analogy between the Sunni-Shia split and the Protestant Catholic split within Christianity. The Sunni-Shia split was never as violent. That in much of the Islamic world, when Sunnis and Shia were living in close proximity, they got along famously well.
So while the Sunni-Shia split was not a reason for the rivalry, it was an important division. After the revolution, the Saudis' fears came to life when Iran began exporting its revolution. This CIA report from 1980 details how the Iranians started helping groups, mostly Shia, trying to overthrow governments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia.
And they prompted the Saudis to redouble their efforts to fight against Iran.
They bolstered their alliance with the US and formed the GCC, an alliance with other Gulf monarchies. The stage was set for conflict.
September the 22nd, Iranian planes attacked Mehrabad Airport outside Tehran. Iran was gambling on a short, sharp campaign.
The rise of Iran as a regional power threatened other neighboring countries as well. In September 1980, Iraq, under the rule of dictator Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran. He was hoping to stop the Iranian Revolution, gain power, and annex some of Iran's oil reserves. But they didn't get far. The war bogged down into a stalemate, complete with trench warfare, chemical weapons, and heavy civilian casualties. When Iran started winning, the Saudis panicked and came to Iraq's rescue. They provided money, weapons, and logistical help.
And so it becomes critical to the Saudis that they build up Iraq and build it up into a wall that can hold back the Iranian torrent that they have unleashed.
The Saudi help allowed Iraq to fight until 1988. By then, nearly 1 million people had died. The Iranians largely blamed the Saudis for the war, and the feud escalated. Fast forward 15 years, and Iraq again became the scene of a proxy war. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein. Neither Saudi Arabia or Iran wanted this to happen, since Iraq had been acting as a buffer between them. But problems arose when the US struggled to replace Saddam.
The United States has no idea what it's doing in Iraq after 2003, and it makes one mistake after another that creates a security vacuum and a failed state and drives Iraq into all-out civil war.
Without a government, armed militias took control of Iraq, splintering the population. Sunni and Shia militias suddenly sprang up all over the country. Many were radical Islamist groups who saw an opportunity to gain power amidst the chaos. These militias were ready-made proxies for Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they both seized the opportunity to try and gain power. The Saudis started sending money and weapons to the Sunni militias, and Iran the Shia. Iraq was suddenly a proxy war, with Saudi Arabia and Iran supporting opposing sides. That trend continued into the Arab Spring, a series of anti-monarchy, pro-democracy protests that swept through the Middle East in 2011. And this had very different consequences for Saudi Arabia and Iran.
That is terrifying to the Saudis, who are the ultimate status quo power. They want the region stable, and they don't want anybody rising up and overthrowing a sclerotic autocratic government for fear that it might inspire their own people to do the same. The Iranians are the ultimate anti-status quo power. They have been trying for decades to overturn the regional order.
Each country threw their weight behind different groups all over the Middle East. Just like in Iraq, the Saudis began supporting Sunni groups and governments, while Iran helped Shia groups rise up against them. For example, in Tunisia, the Saudis backed a dictator while the Iranians stoked protests. In Bahrain, Iran supported Shia leaders seeking to overthrow the government. Saudi Arabia, in turn, sent troops to help quash the unrest. Both got involved in Libya, Lebanon, and Morocco as well. As Saudi Arabia and Iran put more and more pressure on these countries, they began to collapse. Now the feud has gone a step further, with both countries deploying their own militaries. In Yemen, the Saudi military is on the ground helping the central government. They are fighting the rebels called the Houthis, who are an Iranian proxy group. And the reverse is happening in Syria. The Iranian military is fighting side by side with militias, some of them extremist groups like Hezbollah, in support of dictator Bashar al-Assad. They are fighting rebel Sunni groups who are Saudi proxies. The more civil wars that broke out in the Middle East, the more Saudi Arabia and Iran became involved.
Neither the government of Saudi Arabia nor the government of Iran are looking for a fight. But the problem is that these civil wars create circumstances that no one could have predicted. Both the Iranians and the Saudis feel their vital national interests are threatened, are in jeopardy because of different things going on in these civil wars, things that they blame each other for.
Now the Cold War is drawing in other countries. The Saudi government is threatening Qatar, a tiny Gulf state that was developing ties with Iran. Meanwhile, in Syria and Iraq, the terrorist group ISIS is nearing defeat, and both the Saudis and Iranians are angling to take control of that territory. It's a Cold War that's becoming incredibly unpredictable. As the Middle East continues to destabilize, it's hard to say how far these countries will go.
Qatar and Al Jazeera would help a lot of those revolutions all over North Africa happen also. If you look back into that history, I was watching a video. They have a news station that they were using to push in their information about revolutions. And then the people who took to Facebook that helped Arab Spring happen, they were looking at Al Jazeera News. And that influenced revolutions all over there to start because of that Al Jazeera news station from Qatar. And then all the Arab nations band together to completely strangle and not let anything commerce or like movement between Qatar and all the other surrounding nations happen. And it happened like, I remember what year, but there was a video of that on it too, which was really interesting how it all plays out. And with that Ayatollah Khomeini thing, wasn't that when those American embassy people got shut into the embassy and then they sent like those people to pretend they were actors to come get them out?
I think it might be, because I remember that being linked to the Shah of Iran when that was in that time.
I remember Ayatollah Khomeini being, in the words of that revolution was happening when they got stuck there at the embassy. Because it was
watched a video on that a long time ago, huh?
Yeah, there's a movie that they made. I forget what it's called.
Yeah, maybe it's a movie I watched.
Argo.
Yeah, Argo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was him.
Yeah.
Anyways, wow.
That was a good video.
Yeah.
Like to explain what's going on.
The other link that I put in, don't play it, but that's the one that I watched. That one was, I think, even better.
Okay.
Maybe you can email that to me too.
It's called "How the Saudis Ended Up with So Many American Weapons," and it had some really interesting stuff in there.
Okay.
I'll email them.
I manage everything best via email.
So the Saudis and the U.S. are allies, if you want to say. They back one another.
And Iran and Russia are allies.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, this is interesting.
There's 3 neutral states in the region. It's Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. And in both Syria and Yemen are where the 2 proxy wars are happening. Both the countries are basically destroyed. And then all the other countries in the region are either pro-American or pro-Russian, to put it easily, I guess. Not necessarily.
Simple terms.
Wow.
So it's...
Wow.
So this issue is not over oil, or is it?
Spheres of influence.
Yeah. That's the main thing.
And another thing that was interesting that I saw from that movie was how the Ottoman power was destroyed. It was like as if they also had like a mini kind of resurrection. I don't know, because when that destroyed, then you had those two powers like rise up. I don't know. Maybe it was just me. I could.
There was just one, wasn't there?
Well, I mean, because you have the Saudis and then you have the Iranians. Right?
Yeah, but they weren't in the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
Iran wasn't a part of the Ottoman Empire, from what I remember in that video.
They weren't a part of. I mean,
they were over here, I thought.
Oh, I have to watch it again. Let me watch. I have to watch that again.
You just pulled it up.
But it seemed like because they were under both. Well, yeah, both of them were under that Ottoman Empire, and then when that one was what do you call it? When the Ottoman Empire was destroyed, then you had those two countries, or if it was one country, rise up.
It's not. So Iran is over here, and the Ottoman Empire was here. Iran is over here.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch that video again.
Yeah.
No, seems like the more we learn, we need to learn more. So let's go ahead and close in prayer.
The more we learn, the more we need to learn.
The more, yep. So maybe Brother Francisco, you would like to pray?
Yes.
We thank you, Holy Father, for this good day you put before us, with good fellowship and a good study. We thank you, Lord, for always providing for your children. We praise your holy name on your Sabbath day. Thank you for all that you've given us today, Lord. And we pray in your holy and mighty name, in the name of Yeshua, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I gotta catch myself because I find myself always mostly referring to the gentlemen to do the prayer. And here it's the women, just because that's other than Robert and when Leonard's here, but I know Leonard doesn't want to. You've prayed before, but I have to be more, get out of that mindset. Get out of mindset out of always being used to going to the men.
No, Victoria, don't forget her.
Oh, yeah.
The Kiwis.
So, okay, before we close off, anybody have any comments to where we're headed forward? Or what we just learned? Last comments? No? Well,
You
then
know, you were talking about that attorney Roy Cohn.
yeah.
I saw a piece on MSNBC yesterday about him and the connection with Trump and all that. It was pretty good and it was pretty in depth. And I don't know if you can bring that up on the MSNBC's website or not, but they aired that yesterday and it was pretty good.
What was it? What did you say, Brother Francisco?
Talking about and Roy Cohn. I need to look that up because I did not get to look that up and wanted to.
Yeah, they did a piece on Trump and who influenced him in his life, and they did a piece on Roy Cohn and how he influenced Trump into the person that he is now. It was pretty good. It was really, you could see all the stuff that he was teaching them. You could see it in his character presently, you know. And it's kind of scary, actually.
But that it'd be one to know because she's mentioning him as being mentoring Trump, so it would be good to know. I'll look it up too.
Was it this one?
They said that he's acting just like Roy Cohn was, and they have a little piece of footage in there where Roy Cohn debates this other guy, and you could see Trump right in him.
I don't think it's that one.
Well, it does seem to be from what we're studying about prosperity. So literally all we've been waiting for this great economic crash when we've already seen the economic crash. And I think I've heard that being said before, that we've seen the economic crash already. And we're in that building up, clamoring for the union of church and state for prosperity, because that's what we were seeing in this part of the study, that in the 50s, that's the Make America Great that Trump wants, is to bring us back to that prosperity. And they link God to prosperity. So they need God in the mix because they think that he's the one that makes them prosperous.
I think
Is it,
go ahead.
oh, sorry, is it titled "Where's My Roy Cohn"? Is that the documentary? That one?
I don't remember the name of it.
Okay. Is Deadline or what Deadline?
And just to know, Michael Cohen is spelled different than.
Yeah, somebody said earlier, yeah.
There's one title that says Roy Cohn is how, and it's like how we got Trump. There's an article about that.
Yeah.
I don't even see that one.
I posted that one.
Michael.
Roy.
So it is Roy.
Yeah, it's Roy. Cohen. Although the ones that you're looking at all have it spelled different.
So see.
Well, maybe it is C-O. I don't know. I thought I looked it up to get that spelling.
C-O-H-N.
Yeah, that's what I have in. Yeah,
Oh, I probably got the spelling from what she wrote on the board.
Yeah, that's.
So it is C-O-H-N.
Mm-hmm. And 3 days ago, there was one, the final lesson Donald Trump never learned from Roy Cohn. So there's a lot. There's a lot of different ones there.
Oh, this one. Who created Donald Trump? Where's my, is it that one?
I don't know. You could probably check any one of them out.
Yeah.
I am going to go ahead and close up and start packing up to hit the road. And
I think Brother Jonathan has something to say.
I'm good. It's good.
Okay.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Let me Kat, get the chats. Okay, I got them. Thank you. Love you all. See you Monday.